Hello, Tuesday dudes. I'm going to do the United States of America today because it's quite important what happens in the United States of America. The first one we've got is the GDP, which is at the top, marked GDP, and the Pulse of Commerce Index, which is kind of diesel sales. This is trucking, man. And you can see from the year 1999 when the chart graph started that they've just about tracked each other right up to the recession. And at recession time, the diesel sales went down and down and has been running below the GDP line ever since. Now, I find this a bit suspicious and imagine things like the real economy isn't doing much, it's not trucking at all, and the GDP is only flying above the diesel sales because they're making money up and just spending it, and money is buying other money. It's not real. But I've got absolutely no facts to back that up at all. But what we can certainly say is that over the last 6 months to a year, the diesel sales have been turning down, and the GDP has been going up. Now, one of these two series is going to break, and I very, very, very much suspect it's going to be GDP. It's got itself up to blah plus, but it's going to struggle this year to hold on to that elevated status. It's going to be down to blah before you can say bibble. Right. Number two is the famous M ratio. And it's just to say that people are getting excited about the employment situation or unemployment situation and saying how much better things are getting. This M ratio just shows, well, yes, but, and if you look right, it's a long chart. It goes back before 1950. But even so, the thing that people are getting excited about is represented as that little tweaky-eeky thing right at the end, or that little turn-up. And we've had them before over the last 2 years, and they've turned themselves down again, but that's irrelevant compared to the monstrousness of where things have come from. You can see that that is representative of a huge problem at the heart of United States employment. And you can see they can shout as much as they like about employment getting better, but it is miles away from where it was. Right. Number three is a clever little chart. You can see the red one is shaped a bit like the Joker chart, and it's got relationship to the Joker chart. But what we've got here in the black line, bottom left, top righting, is the amount of labour force that should be added, that is being added hypothetically by the increase in population. The population is increasing, the amount of people available for work is increasing, and it is against that that the unemployment situation must be taken into account. The number generally is about 250,000. New jobs have to be created to take care of this increase in the prospective labour population. And, of course, we have all those pointy down bars, which is the Great Recession, that has to be got back as well. So, to get back to the start of the recession and the amount of employment there, and to take care of the amount of increased population, this has to happen. And that's the blue bars that go from now till the end of 2016, pumping out 264,000 jobs every single month without fail. If that is achieved, no recessions, no dropping back or anything, then things will be back to where they were before this Great Recession started. And you can just go, what are the chances of that happening? Not a lot. Withholding taxes, again, people on the blogosphere and mainstream media were trumpeting the last withholding taxes, and it's an extremely good way of measuring your employment, because you can't really fudge it. You pay your withholding taxes when you are employed. You don't otherwise. But that great big bar sticking up at the end there, which is the first quarter of 2012, is only being measured against the last quarter of 2011, because these are quarter over quarter figures. So it doesn't take much to beat that sticky down one. And that's why the latest sticky up one is so impressive. And really, you can add the two together and take the average, and that's where it is. And that, I would make it, about equivalent to quarter 3 of 2011. And if you look at the shape of the last blocks, positive outside the recession, it's kind of stepping down. And I think this will mean that the employment increases will start to level off from now till the end of the year. There will be increases, but there won't be increases in the increases, and that is just not good enough. Right. So we move on to MISH and credit, and a Fred chart, non-revolving credit analysis. We know that revolving credit is down, and we know that non-revolving includes buying cars and things like that, but also student loans. These student loans are starting to stop because people are running out of, they've done their courses and they're coming out. But for the moment, that is the main component of non-revolving credit in the US. So total non-revolving credit in blue is sticky icky uppy. But down at the bottom in green is student loans and government loans, which is making the sticky uppiness of the blue one. But really, overall, it is red and turning down if you take out the student loans and government loans. Revolving credit is down like non-revolving credit is. Mortgages are obviously down, so there isn't so much credit money going into the economy, and without that there's no chance for GDP staying at blah plus, and there is no chance for increases in the employment situation. There will be maybe increases, but as I say, there won't be increases on those increases. Slipping back to blah looks very much on the cards, or in the cards, I believe you say in America. These are 4 little charts based on Fred docs, and they're quite easy to read. You've got an upper limit and a lower limit, which are the mostest and leastest in recessions since the Second World War, with the grey line in the middle is the average of those recessions since the Second World War, and the dark green is what is happening now. Like industrial production, not bad. It's doing as it normally does, coming out of the nadir, the bottom of a recession. Not bad at all, not bad. Real income, top right, is much lower, and it's much towards the bottom minimum coming out of a recession, which is not good. The industrial production is good enough and real income is down. The people that are working are being screwed harder and harder. Their wages are being pushed down and more work is being pushed out of them. The employment situation bottom left is as we would expect it to be, right down towards the minimum of normal coming out of recessions. And that is even based on, because the unemployment went so precipitously down to a bottom, that bottom should be easier to get out of, but they're not even getting out of the employment real big hole. And retail sales, real retail sales, not so they're inflation adjusted, are very average, which is surprising, seeing that most all recessions since the Second World War, in fact all of them, were normal recessions, and this one is like the Great Depression, which is a balance sheet recession, meaning the households have run out of their ability to take on more credit. So it is really quite surprising that real retail sales are holding up. Americans are wonderful. Second to last one, this is from the Brookings Institute. I think interactive export nation for Americans. It might be quite fun to go and play with. Follow the link. Exports, generating prosperity by linking the world's metro economies. Use this interactive tool to explore export trends in the nation's 100 largest metropolitan areas. And you hover over the bubbles, the circles there, and see what's going on. So I've hovered over New York because it is the biggest. And you get information like the export value going out of New York is 78 billion. We're used to talking big numbers, and 78 billion doesn't sound that much, but it really is a lot. Direct export production jobs, so they reckon there are 330,000 jobs in the New York area directly connected to exports. Export share of metro GDP, in other words, how much of the local area GDP is down to these exports, and it's 6.6%. Total export supported jobs, so they'll link in things like the docks and things, which is over 500,000 jobs. Export growth was 7% from 2003 to 2008, and now it's up to 2010, it's up to 8.9. Exports doing well. And what are they exporting? Surprisingly, for me anyway, New York, the top number is percentage, 18.7, is chemicals. And I've spotted round many of these spots on this interactive and found quite a lot of the exports from these areas is chemicals. And I was quite shocked that chemicals came at the top of so many lists. Financial services and business services for New York are next, and it really, if you add those together, that makes the big one. That makes 29. But actually, chemicals is bigger than financial services. Travel and tourism, as you can imagine, in New York. Royalties is another one that turns up on just about all of these spots. Royalties is a big deal. I've read about it, but I didn't realize it was such a big deal. Computers and electronics, medical equipment, sporting goods, freight and port services, and education at the bottom. Right, that's exports, and setting us up for Edward Luce in the Financial Times, our last one, number 8, which is a nice little cartoon thing. Production line, America producing stars to go on the Stars and Stripes, but that's the idea of this article. America reassembles industrial policy. What if Gene Sperling, you've heard of him, director of the White House's National Economic Council, declared that a manufacturing renaissance would be strongly in America's interest? Imagine, he added that the US's manufacturing decline was an aberration that should be reversed. Suppose he came close to breaking a real taboo by saying industrial policy may now make sense. Since Mr. Sperling is President Barack Obama's chief economic advisor, and thus speaking on his behalf, people would take notice, wouldn't they? Well, that is precisely what Mr. Sperling said in a carefully researched speech in Washington 10 days ago, and almost no one paid attention. The lack of interest may stem from it being an election year. Nothing diverts eyeballs like a horse race. Poor White House marketing may also not have helped. In addition, few observers would expect Mr. Obama to get anything important through a gridlocked Congress this year, let alone something unorthodox, and of course they'd be right. Yet Mr. Sperling's words offered evidence of what is starting to sound like a change of worldview in the White House. It is true that Mr. Obama has created a few incentives here and there for favoured types of manufacturing. The 2009 stimulus contained boons for battery makers and clean energy. He entitled his State of the Union address, "An America Built to Last." In his largely hypothetical 2013 budget proposal, Congress will almost certainly not pass a budget for the fourth year running, he offered incentives for manufacturers to reshore jobs to the US. At the time, it smacked of electioneering. Most of his proposals, including a slightly lower tax rate for domestic manufacturers, looked gimmicky and stood no chance of enactment before 2013. Mr. Sperling, President Bill Clinton's senior economic advisor in the late 1990s, seemed the least likely person to announce the abandonment of a sacred plank of Clintonomics. That would be free market and everything to do with let's just go into the world. But this is starting to look like an underestimate of how much Mr. Obama is in earnest. Could industrial policy be creeping back into fashion? Mystic says yes. And it is essential as well, because you're up against countries like China and Germany that have been doing it for decades, and other countries that are now seen as the good ones, the good way of going. So is America going to stick to its private capitalism way of doing things and let the successful countries whose governments are aiding industry be more successful than they? No, they are not. The United States is going to go and have itself an industrial policy, as is the United Kingdom, as is Europe, as is South America, as is India, as is the rest of the bloody world. Of course, it can't work for everyone in the world. It worked for China and Germany because the rest of the world was playing the free market game, and they won because they were rigging this game. But with everyone trying to rig the game just falls apart. Oh dear. Bye.